Hey, welcome again to Redacted Nuisance. 15 minutes of Dr. J ranting um, with totally lo-fi production values, unedited and put straight up onto internet. Because why not? Um, it's called Redacted Nuisance because I wanted to call it Queer Nuisance. But if I call it Queer Nuisance, there are some people who won't be able to download or listen to this, so I've called it Redacted Nuisance, not because I wish to hide who I am, because I'm playing the game of censorship or hiding the words, so that people can find it and listen to it and hopefully be inspired and hopefully be cared for by it. What I'm going to do today is read something I wrote on Neil Gaiman. I don't know how long it is, because one of the things, at this particular time of recording, there's 11, there's around 10 or slightly more than 10 women who've made very believable, I totally believe them, allegations that all feel very similar against Neil Gaiman, and there's also a civil suit from the first person who made these claims on the Tortoise podcast against both Neil Gaiman and Amanda Palmer, which I heartily agree that both of them are being done, and you'll hear that in what I wrote. And what I wrote I put up on some social medias, but I'm going to put out here as well and read it out. And then, so on Neil Gaiman. I've been listening to this from the start. I heard all of the Tortoise podcast, including the episodes where the podcasters slam sex positivity and BDSM practices. With that nuance influencing how I processed the way the information came out, I was thinking, bad BDSM, how tiresome. Standard older man misusing power in a BDSM setting, and we've all seen that. I imagined Neil Gaiman to be the person in the sex play space wearing a kilt, a fedora, and showing off with a single tail whip, accompanied by a much younger, inexperienced, conventionally pretty woman. I totally believe all of the women's stories. Pedestrian, dull, and skeezy. This was disappointing. Then more came out. And even more. This is not just a bit of skeezy BDSM. This is somebody using an imagination of BDSM, the language, and a half-read the back of a book on how to do good BDSM to commit sexual assault. Then the statements about neurospice, especially autism, came through, in his own words, and his voice in recordings and voice messages. The last couple of Tortoise episodes have them. I've had quite some experience with neurospicy partners. One of the best sent me a spreadsheet to help with our consent negotiations before we even did our first playdate. This is what autism in a BDSM situation actually looks like. What is coming through these women's stories is somebody abusing power and grooming, and their partner aiding and abetting and being active in that grooming. Yes, Amanda Palmer, you are also skeezy. This is not autism. They are also ignoring the need to have enthusiastic consent all the time, every time, for all that you do, which is basic, and not just in BDSM, in all sexual encounters. There is some conflict here for me. Sandman was the portal, the entry drug, to a friendship group that kept me alive when I was so determined not to be. The comics hold so many memories of reading in the university lower common room and finding a group of people sort of like me who I could connect with. That the comics contained people who felt some of the ways I do, queer, trans, gender diverse, and these were complex people with multiple facets. This helped me think about myself in new ways and eventually arrive at some idea of who I was. Neil Gaiman has been significant in the start of friendships, not only the ones in New Zealand, but also my core UK friendships. Spending time with Josephine at a reading by Neil Gaiman and then walking and talking with her afterwards was the start of a friendship that has lasted 20 years. Will I get rid of the books that I have? Not yet. They will sit on my shelves and remind me of friends, and that brings me pleasure. Eventually I will need more space and I'll become less sentimental about things and they will go. Am I inclined to read them? No. As knowing more about how Neil Gaiman acts changes how some stories work. Calliope's storyline shifts from the perspective of the entrapped to the person who entrapped her. How can you read a story about abuse written by somebody who abused women in a similar way? Currently, I couldn't. Will I buy more of Neil Gaiman's writings? Hell no! Do I want to see what happens in the third installment of Good Omens? Hell yes! Do I feel sorry for the actors involved? For sure! This should have been the last installment in a grand imagining of one of the greatest writers, Sir Terry Pratchett, if you're in doubt of who I meant. Meanwhile, Neil Gaiman and Amanda Palmer show, as always, greed and power revealing the underlying person. They were always thus. They always desired this. Then they got the ability to have what they desired. Power over people. Now, I've read some really interesting, and I've listened to some really, really good commentary, podcasts, and video essays on Neil Gaiman. And I don't think there's much that I can add here. I would recommend going and finding those essays and those people who have put some real thought and analysis on not just the story, the way that it's been presented, who it's been presented by, the underlying narrative from Tortoise Media. There is a real underlying narrative from Tortoise Media and the podcast that was about negating sex positivity, that was about slut-shaming the women themselves, that there was an edge of how dare you enjoy BDSM, how dare you find power play and play around consent interesting and fascinating and something you would be attracted to. Now, that's not to say that that was what was going on, but that was the underlying narrative from Tortoise Media, was anyone who is practicing BDSM in any way is involved in sexual abuse, which is not true. And that is a very dangerous kind of added narrative that they put through. But I read a very, very good piece, and I will try to remember where, which was basically the podcasters from Tortoise Media expected the cancel culture to turn around and go, oh no, we won't cancel Neil, we like Neil too much to cancel him. And they seem surprised that basically the response from everyone is like, okay, fuck him, I did like his stuff, but fuck him, his stuff is now cancelled, he's cancelled, goodbye, don't let the door hit you on the ass, you're gone, get rid. And they seemed surprised that that was the reaction of the liberals, of the left, of the queers, of the people, because of our avowed relationship to his writing and to his media. And pretty much everyone I've spoken to has gone, oh shit. And they've done very similar things to me. Just put the books off to one side and gone, I'm not sure that I can get rid of them yet. I need to grieve, I need to process, but I ain't going to be reading them. I ain't going to be buying them again. And that is a response that I don't think people expected. I think the people who put this out, and I honestly believe this, listening to the podcast, listening to the undertones of conversation and that within the podcast, they expected everyone to go, oh, Neil, don't be a bad boy, but we'll still buy your books, we'll still watch your media, we're not going to cancel you because you're one of us. That's not the way that it works. That is definitely not the way that it works. The number of people that I know who've been cancelled for being abusive, for being manipulative, for being grooming. There was a band several years ago which was made up of one very gender diverse person and another person, and one of the two of them, I believe it was the other person, um, was accused of grooming. The stories came out, and everyone went, "That band is now bye bye. We don't play your music." It's not. We don't hold people to different standards just because they're queer. We probably hold them to higher standards. We probably turn around and go, "Okay, did you do this? Yep. Do we still want you on our playlist? No." That's it. Um, that's kind of how it goes. And I don't think people outside of the queers expected that level of reaction. And of course, because there's a lot of the people who are talking about this who are queer or of the queer spectrum or are neurospicy and of the neurospicy spectrum, and that is indeed mostly a circle, um, that it all just, nobody outside of that sphere expected that sort of reaction. I think they thought that we would go, "Oh, no," and have a reaction very similar to the Conservatives of like, "Oh, well, Trump's just a bad boy," or "Yeah, but the people just wanted money," or something like this. Not be the honest, upright, upstanding people that the queers are who go, "This person did something really bad. I don't feel comfortable consuming their media anymore. Let me think about how I do that and how I process that and how I process the physical objects within my life that belong to this person." But those playlists where he's reading the books, those audio books which has his voice on, I'm not listening to those. I'm listening to the other audio books which don't have his voice on. Um, I am listening to stuff in a way that people will not know. How do I put this without getting myself in trouble? I am trying to think of a way to obfuscate this. I am listening to media that I own in a way that somebody like Netflix or Audible won't be able to see that I'm listening or playing media that I own. Because I have the DVDs, I have the books physically, I have the CDs of the audiobooks. So I would normally just stream it because it's so much easier, but I will not, because I don't want to give those clicks to people to say, "Hey, I'm still listening," or "I'm still partaking in some of this." And I'm not. I just can't. Every time I think about rereading and working through Sandman, I think of Calliope and I think of the women's stories, and I look at the closeness of how Calliope was treated and how Neil Gaiman has treated the women in the stories, and I'm like, this is not written from the woman's point of view. This is not written from her point of view and her powerful redemption. This is written from his point of view for almost enjoyment, and that feels so wrong to read, and I can't even imagine reading it. It does not make sense to me to partake of the media in that way. So yeah, go. I think the Council of Geeks, Jesse Gender, just go have a look on YouTube for some of the really good takes on Neil Gaiman's and the whole controversy, because there are people who've done really, really good takes that are hours long, well researched. This is 15 minutes of gabbling that's been researched. But of course, I never remember where I read anything because I have the brain, well, I have a brain turned to cheese by complex PTSD and menopause. So my memory is, I don't recall. By the time I finished recording this, I don't recall what I said at the start. So when I hear these, when I put these up, I don't edit, I don't re-listen to them, I don't do anything. I'm watching the levels as I'm talking and just making sure that they're not too peaky. That's all the checks that I do. I'm hearing it when you're hearing it. If I've fucked up, well, I know that I've fucked up the same time as you know that I've fucked up.